All right.
Oh, hello everyone, and welcome to Groupthink. Groupthink is our dialogue series at CU where we pick a topic and talk about whatever feels meaningful. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, and I'm joined by some amazing people, and they will introduce themselves now.
I guess I can go ahead and go. My name is Jonah Zacks. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm a high school senior. Am I missing anything there?
Hey, my name is Ashley Lynn. I am a high school senior from Vancouver, Washington.
Hi everyone, my name is Chabu Kapumba. I am 19 and a first year at the University of Toronto.
Zoe, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry, I got this new microphone and I'm just testing it
Oh,
out.
it's really nice.
But hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm a high school senior in Lexington, Kentucky.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia. I'm 23 years old and I'm currently in Pennsylvania.
Hey, I'm Gary. I'm one of the co-founders of CU. I'm in New York City.
Awesome, thank you all so much. So today we're talking about process, and we start off with a word association. So whenever you all have your 1 to 3 words ready, thanks to Jonah, he changed that. Just shout them out and you can explain why those words came to mind.
I would say steps and strategy. I don't know, those just come to mind as soon as I think of process.
I can go next. My word association for process is first being it's something that's instinctive for me because I think that I've recognized that I think in processes often, so it's something that kind of happens naturally. And then also it's good big ideas, and the reason that's kind of a phrase, I guess, but the reason why that's associated is because I think that like when you set up a process, you get to think about like all your really big ideas and like big goals and ambitions, so that like while you're in the midst of doing it, you can kind of live those goals through your process work, because it's harder to do, like it's easier to think of them in the beginning than to do them in the midst of the process.
I'm going to go ahead and follow the rules this time and say policy versus ideals. Or maybe policy from ideals would be better now that I think about it.
Jonah, you still kind of broke the rules there. So the words go together.
They go together. We're getting there.
I guess for me, the words that come to mind are simplicity and routine. I think it's important that your process is something that you understand.
Wow.
And it should be something that you just do naturally all the time.
Think of replication and evolution. I think replication because I feel like processes give you like the prompts and structure to be able to like do something again and again over time. And evolution because if you don't know the process of how you do something, you can't really change the individual steps of how you get to your final result.
I'll say, I can go. So I can say practices, constraints, and freedom. So just quickly say like processes are almost by definition like constraints on like like it constrains like the possibility space, but it also opens up longer term possibility space as well, right? So if you you have the freedom, right, to eat a bunch of junk food now, right? But that constrains your future possibilities that you may think are desirable. All right, so there's this interesting kind of interplay between constraining and constraints and freedom through process.
And I would say a lot of like what similar to what's been said. So I would say subconscious, learned, and change. Subconscious because a lot of the processes that we engage in, we don't even realize that we are engaging in them. That's part of like what Zoe touched on with routine. Learned because obviously all of our processes are learned through like habits that we've developed or from other people, and then change because once you become conscious of your processes, you have the ability to change and improve them. So does anyone have something to start us off with?
I think I can start us off by asking everyone what's an example of a process that you engage in?
I guess I can kick us off with that one. I actually did this, I guess, process routine last night. I'm not like super into like cosmetic things like fancy soaps and like painting my nails, but it's something that I do or I try to do at least once a month. Because I know that I like when my nails are painted. I like the nice smelling soaps. It's just not something I remember to do all the time. And also people keep giving me Lush products because I think that people are just don't know what to give teenage girls. They're like, let me give you bath bombs. And now I'm like, I have 5 bath bombs that I don't know what to do with. So that has now become a ritual of like around once a month, like trying out these new things. Which is nice because you see people in movies and like their white robes and they're all like warm and comfy. And I like emulating that on occasion.
I think that's really cool, and also like necessary. I think that a process that I have is I feel like I mention this all the time, but just like having a reflection to do at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And it's just for like reinstating the good vibes, reframing the day and just like being in a good mindset at the beginning and end of the day.
It's interesting to me that both of these are like they fall into kind of a similar category. I guess I don't really know what the name of that category is, but the sort of like moment that you take to increase your functionality later on, if that makes sense. And my equivalent to that, I guess, would be handwriting exercises. So I do like in 4th grade or whatever, I sit down and trace out the letters. I try to do that most days. I don't always. Yeah, but that's kind of my equivalent of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think processes help me like manage, I don't know, like energy transitions. So I have a pretty complex process before getting into tech Sabbath. And if I don't follow it, I will forget. So like it's just like very intentional like rituals where like first I clean all the paper and I remove the sticky notes and then I do breath work. And yeah, so it's like a series of steps.
See, I've been trying to think about which process I want to mention in this example, but I think it's hard because I've undergone like a lot of change in the past couple months, and so I'm just starting a lot of these processes for the first time in the past couple of weeks, and they're constantly changing. And so I don't really have like a set process for most things except for like a daily reflection, but that's about it.
Speaking of reflection, I started doing. Well, I think some of you know I use this app called Dailyo. I'm almost on like day 840 in a row. That then progressed. So that's just like a quick like check off what habits you did, and then there's a daily like journal I do, which is separate from brain drops, which are like just more like thought pieces basically. And so in addition to daily reflections, I do weekly reflections. I started monthly reflections in April, and I just did my first annual reflection yesterday. Probably going to start doing quarterly reflections in 2021. It's been working out pretty well this year. So.
Here's a question I kind of have, and that is, what things do you think need a process?
This is kind of a really broad response, but I think things that you want to do and things that you want to avoid doing, I think are good things. Like I know Ashley mentioned that, you know, she has kind of a complicated process to get ready for Tech Sabbath, but if she doesn't do it, then she'll forget. So you're avoiding forgetting because you really want to do something. And so you have this long process to do it. But I think it's in the same way that like you should journal and reflect so that you avoid, you know, doing things maybe that you don't really like doing, but you wouldn't notice unless you were actually intentionally thinking about, you know, why do I, you know, feel like my energy is being sucked on like X type of calls? Oh, wait, you know, I now understand that and I won't, you know, participate, or I can do this to mitigate that. So I think you need, yeah, I'll just leave it that answer. What you want to do and what you want to avoid doing.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with that. I think a lot of times it boils down to like habits you want to cultivate and also things you want to make sure that get done. So I know that for with our lives are so busy, it's really important to implement practices that like Chabu and Zoe were talking about, like that are really fall under that kind of like self-care category that Jonah mentioned. So like I know that if I don't make a process out of doing my daily reflections, it's not going to happen. And if I don't like make it habitual.
Moving away from self-care a little bit, like to some degree, I think if you're doing something that's going to affect more people than just you, or like something bigger than yourself, like you need some type of approval process or like some type of insight process in a way.
I also think it's important, again, this is pretty broad, but I think it's important to have a process for things that require a lot of attention to detail or things that are enriched by like having a great attention to detail. Because it's really easy to like skim over things when you're in the midst of doing something. And so a process can force you to slow down and pay attention to like all the smaller steps that have a big impact overall.
Yeah, I think processes help me like almost get into flow state. I feel like you need processes for things that are like, I wouldn't say like super, super hard, but like hard enough that it wouldn't naturally happen.
And on that, so like I think that it's important to make processes for things that you're really good about doing so that you can help other people learn how to adopt them as well.
Yeah, I'm going to follow Julia's lead here and say governing. Just because, I mean, like Zoe knows the process that we stick to or try to stick to on steering committee has really saved us. multiple times. I name a few examples, but I'm not going to do that. So.
And now this makes me want to pose a question. When are processes more harmful than helpful?
I think I can start off this conversation. I think that they are more harmful than helpful when they get in the way of like the actual end product. It's really easy to get lost in the process work sometimes and then like never actually arrive to any kind of conclusion or any kind of finished product. So you also want like a process that encourages you to kind of arrive to something or some kind of point.
Yeah, I don't think processes are like intrinsically like bad or good. It really depends on like your mindset as you're engaging in them. Like, are you growth oriented? Like, can your processes change? Because it's really easy to get stuck in that cycle of like engaging in the process over and over without like actually making anything happen or making any changes.
Yeah, to the point about an end product, I think like working in the corporate world, I really learned that sometimes the processes are create more inefficiencies a lot of the time, and too many loopholes or too many eyes on something where people get too nitpicky, and then the end product, like Chabu said, can be detrimental to the end product.
And I think this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chabu.
No, sorry. This was like inspired by Julia's comment. Processes that aren't built to evolve or exist in spaces that don't like evolution are super harmful because it forces you to like re-engage in something that's problematic and prevents you from like learning from like past mistakes.
Yeah, totally agree. And I was going to say, I think, Julie, what you were touching on too, just like bureaucracy in general of things where it's like, do you need 5 signatures on that in order to get this done? Or, do you need to go through this process? And there's so many weird examples where bureaucracy stopped progress, and then people look back and they're like, wow, like we shouldn't have to, go through 6 different people for product design because that's how we missed out on this huge innovation. And we came onto it a year too late. So I think in general, if a process of yours is hindering process, or if it feels like a chore, then it's probably not a good process, or there's a better way that you can go about it where it will actually, serve its purpose and really help.
I guess my thinking is that a process can do one of two things. It can either speed you up or slow you down, which feels like it should be an obvious thing, but it wasn't for me. And theoretically, like what you want to do is if you're about to step on a nail, you want a process that's going to slow you down so that you see that nail before you step on it. And so like Zoe was saying, if you know that your pathway is going to be pretty clear and there's not a whole lot of obstacles that you're going to trip over and slow yourself down, then a process can really hurt you. But also if you have a process to rush through something when you shouldn't be, when you should really be taking your time and being careful, that can also be detrimental.
On the point that Jonah made, I think that a process is very much reflective of who created it. And so like if you're prone to just rushing through things, then the process will encourage people to like rush through things. If you're someone who like has a tendency to like go through things very slowly or at a pace that doesn't match, then the process will also be reflective of that. So I think it's also really important to like assess the premise that it's founded on.
And I'll say on that, I think it's really important to understand the foundations of any process. Like, I'm sure we've all been places where like, oh, that's kind of a weird rule that they have. But there's a reason that like these weird rules and weird processes get started. It's because something happened or someone's trying to avoid something. But sometimes those processes can be really detrimental because it's purely out of avoidance for something. You're not trying to like foster something that's better. So I think it's important to understand the foundations, but also to know when to be flexible Like if you miss a week of your weekly reflection, that's not the end of the world. But if you really beat yourself up over it, then that process is no longer helping you. It's now a stressor. So I think you have to find the right balance between holding yourself accountable, but also giving yourself a little bit of grace.
This makes me want to pose another question. Like, what is the balance between focusing on the process and the end product?
I mean, is it a balance, or is process how you achieve end products?
I think there has to be some sort of harmony. Like I think there's some good things about spontaneity in life.
Well, that's a process, I think. I mean, I would say like that's a really, like, it's kind of meta, right? But it's like the process of being open to like the flow, like the spontaneity. At least that's how abstract my brain works. But sorry.
No, I mean that makes sense, but you can't plan spontaneity. Like you can, it's a process and it's something we should all lean into, but you also can't plan spontaneous moments in a way.
Well, I would say that a spontaneous moment won't, like, why don't we have a thought experiment? A spontaneous moments won't happen if you don't consume any content. You're sitting in a room all day. You don't talk to anyone. You don't leave the house, right? So there's obviously things that you can do that generate more luck, right? More spontaneity, which is why I actually wrote a blog post like 3.5 years ago, about how like a big reason why I moved to New York was to increase my luck, which is, I mean, we don't have to talk about what even, I think you get what I mean by luck, right? It's not really luck. It's like just things bouncing against each other, right? And sometimes cool shit happens, right? Which is actually, I mean, the founding of CU is actually a great example. Like it was through a bunch of networking kind of circles that we all found each other.
So you're saying basically creating randomness is a process.
Yeah, I think yeah, that's more or less, right? It's like one kind of concept that some people like to use is increase your luck surface area. So it's like you almost have like a luck net, right? And like you can do things like the setting that you're in, the communities that you spend time in, the content that you consume, right? Like you're hoping that something gets caught in the net, right? Like some kind of useful thing gets caught in the net. So I don't like, I guess I listen to all sorts of podcasts that I don't seek out because I subscribed to like when you think about it like as podcast subscription, like how many times, like, well, I don't know if all of you have like a podcast ritual, like listening ritual, but like there's often podcasts that are like weekly or bi-weekly, sometimes more than that. And because that person is on a similar sort of mission or has a certain set of interests, right? There's going to be like, it's not like, is it right to say that it's like kind of random that you're getting like insight from at the right time from these people? No, it's like, no, you're actively consuming a bunch of stuff, which sometimes yields like surprising fruits. But it's your act of dedicating that time to listening to that podcast that allowed for certain dots to connect.
Yeah, I would say I'm not a process person at all. I'm like super spontaneous in like basically every aspect of life. And I think it kind of goes with the question, like, what is the balance between focusing on the process and the end product? Like, I approach things often wanting the most like efficient way to get the most effective outcome, and like constantly reassessing like if steps are vital to the process, which like Gary said, being spontaneous is honestly kind of a process as well. So yeah, just constantly assessing if steps are vital along the way.
I think that like people can up in terms of like being spontaneous and whether or not it's a process. I think that like you can have the internal process of when I see something cool to be reactive or to be responsive to that new
Oh,
cool
wow.
thing.
Wow. Yep.
And then that's an exercise of like being spontaneous. So like I like watched a movie and then made, I guess, the spontaneous decision to like watch every movie by this director and like watch tons of like interviews by this director. And that was very reactive and spontaneous because I had no plans for it. You know what I mean? And to circle back to this question on the balance between focusing on the end goal and the product, I think that balance suggests that it's either or, like you engage in one or the other. And I kind of like to see it as like a dynamic, like a relationship. And so the process should inform the end product and the end product should inform the process. Like very much a dialogue between the two is
Dialogue.
yeah, like it's a healthier way of approaching it in comparison to like how I used to look at it for sure.
Yeah, I guess like even taking that like more tangibly, like I think about like the design thinking process, like how you start with empathy to find your problem, and then you ideate and then you prototype and then you build your product, and then after you have your product you like repeat that cycle over again. So it really is like a dialogue, right? Like it never stops because you're always getting feedback and you're always going back to the beginning of that process, and like showing it to the people you're trying to help and getting their feedback on it and iterating.
I'm curious to hear some examples from all of you about processes that didn't work too well in organizations you've been a part of, and why you don't think they worked well.
I think that this kind of speaks to a lack of process, or like the process that was in place wasn't wasn't strong enough almost. But the way it was a process of if there was an issue or a complaint, how did you begin the process of addressing it? And essentially the process was to bring it up in the next like exec meeting, and that process failed like time and time and time again because it became like a thing of competing like competing perspectives on the issue and not like resolving it or having like a discussion around it. So yeah, I think that's a process that a lot of organizations struggle with though. Like how do you bring up an issue in a way that's productive and conducive to resolving the issue?
I had mentioned earlier, but sometimes like when too many eyes are on something, people get so nitpicky, and then even like the great idea that was the start of everything, people start second guessing that idea, and then there's no follow through in the end. So yeah, that can be something that doesn't work very well if you involve too many people.
I would also add just Parley Pro in general. I did parliamentary procedure for a while, and in FBLA and other businessy orgs, they it's like it's so dumb. Why does someone need to make the motion and why does someone need to second it? And like I mean like yes, I guess it makes sense, but like when people don't know the rules, like if people don't know the process, it becomes very hard to follow.
Oh, interesting. So it gets in the way of perhaps a more useful end product. Or
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's hard to justify changing that process though if you're not sure as an organization what end products you're prioritizing. Right?
One thing that I'm going to throw out, it's kind of a big one, is the college admissions process. And I mean, like everyone has their own thoughts and feelings on that. And my thinking is just
Scholarships too.
yeah, those two. My thinking is a lot of the college admissions process was created in really good faith, really well intentioned, and for a time really was a good thing. Like standardized testing for a long time was a really good thing. And then there were people who decided it was in their best interests to turn it into a bad thing, to try to take advantage of it. And they figured out how to do that. And we haven't really updated since then. So I guess if you don't update your processes is the wider lesson, then they get stale and stop working.
I guess the only way I can think to describe this is like chronic pessimism of like when there are issues that face like an organization, you can't just spend every meeting complaining about everything that's wrong and like, man, if we were in a different world, like I would do this to so and so, where it's like great that you feel that way, but can we channel that into some actual solutions, which I'm in an organization that's kind of going through that where we have weekly calls and people just complain. And so we've wasted months where we really could have been, addressing the problem and really getting to its root. But we spent all that time complaining.
Wow. So complaining was the process, and the culture that was instantiated was a pessimistic culture.
Yeah, because people were just like, well, if we do this, then like this like worst possible outcome is going to happen, which I don't think inherently is a bad exercise. Like thinking of the worst outcome is generally a good exercise, but that can't stop you always from doing something that needs to be done, even if that's like a slim possibility that things could really blow up in your face. Because sometimes it just needs to get done. It doesn't really matter what the worst outcome is.
That makes me want to pose a question of what's the relationship with a process and the culture that it exists in?
Such a great question.
And I think I can start off by commenting that I almost feel like it's like a 50-50 thing. Like you can have an incredible process, but if the culture is not conducive to like engaging in it, reiterating on it, learning from it, then it will eventually become more problematic than helpful.
Yeah, one way to put that is process affords certain types of culture. Culture affords the like faithful implementation of certain processes.
Oh, like almost like the Constitution has a line in it that I like bring up all the time. I think I know 10 words from the Constitution and I'll tell 10 of them are this. And it's the fact that there's this like phrase of like the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. And so I guess the Constitution was a process for how we're going to govern the nation, but the culture has evolved where like that process is now more problematic and like not conducive to achieving the things in the process.
On that note, we don't talk enough about the spirit of something, because a process is like, I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, we should. I don't know if we have a lot of time this call, right? But we need to talk more about the concept of civic spirit, like people spirits, more.
Chabu, it's really interesting that you bring this up. At first, I was thinking this was going to be a non sequitur, but maybe it's not. Which is that the spirit of the law is a book by Montesquieu during the Enlightenment, and that's the book where he proposed the idea of a constitution and limited government. And it goes to that point where these are not new ideas, and so we build on processes that have already been developed over time.
I think this is like just an observation based on what Jonah said, but the idea that like processes are meant to evolve and cultures are meant to evolve, and that common ground is like really important to recognize.
And I think, Chabu, that raises kind of thinking, I mean, it's kind of exactly what you said in a way. And what we've been talking about is that processes can like inhibit growth. And that's not just like the products that like an organization is producing, but also the culture in a way. Like you can't, get past something until you start testing out new processes. And I think that's something we see with a lot of older organizations that kind of do things a certain way. They have parliamentary procedure, they do X, Y, and Z every single year. And they aren't able to grow beyond that because they don't have the processes to do that, even if their culture is advancing. But yeah, I think processing kind of put a cap on the culture, but also I think it works vice versa, where you can have a very like hierarchy. I can't pronounce that word. A culture with a lot of hierarchy. We'll just go with that. That can keep people from adopting new processes at the same time.
Anyone have something to add or another question to pose?
I think this would be cool, but like, what are some processes, both unintentional and intentional, that exist in CU?
Chabu just coming up with all these questions. They're just so good. One of them is, and y'all know this, like, there's probably more benefit than even I can fathom. But like, when I create a doc, and I send it to you, what am I doing? I'm testing you. I'm actually getting feedback on the doc. I'm seeing if you're interested in the project that the document outlines. It's an excuse to get to know you. We should actually document. Processes more, because, like, I hope that you've learned processes through CU that are applicable to every part of your life, right? So anytime you have, like, all of you are going to be designing draft, like, for this particular process, like, all of you are going to be drafting documents, or you should be, right? Thinking about what you're building before you build it. And there's a way to, so I know Zoe was like, or is like trying to find people for dice, and like, a great way to actually, instead of like getting people in their like interview mode, hey, what do you think about this? Like, it's almost like much better of an interview, right? To actually, like, you have a plan. Dice is 12-month plan. It's like, okay, is there really thoughtful feedback on this? Ooh, maybe we should continue talking more deeply.
I think that a process that's cool that we use is the one that we have for like Juntos, like the note-taking process. It's equal parts like open-ended conversation, but just enough structure for everyone to like feel comfortable enough to just like engage in the conversation and know where it's heading. And like, we get things done, but we also have like the opportunity to go off on a tangent that really matters and like be inspired by the conversation. And it's also one that's like used in a lot of spaces. Like, I know we use it for the empowerment crew along with Junto, or we have like adaptations of it that exist in other places.
One thing that I'm going to throw out there is the processes we use in steering committee a lot. And the one I want to underline is, why am I blanking? The amendments section that we use to make changes to our processes, because that is, in my opinion, the most important one of what steering committee does, but that could just be my angle on it. And I think that anytime you're making long-lasting changes to governing that's going to be in effect long after you're around, it's important to follow the process.
Groupthink.
I think an unintentional process that we have is that we are naturally very optimistic. Like, I think we present problems and our instinct is like, let's solve that. Like, who can we talk to that can help you fix this problem? Or can we just get a lot of ideas on a doc and like flesh those out and figure out what's going to work? In a way that I think a lot of other organizations are slower to do that. And I don't know like how that culture got created. I think it was both maybe intentional and unintentional, but I think it's been really beneficial for all of us.
Again, on the note of unintentional, I think like vulnerability and opening up is definitely one of our processes and something that's really beneficial, because obviously once one person opens up and is vulnerable, it encourages other people as well.
Yeah, so I would just add to that by saying like almost like vulnerability is like a spirit that is like kind of fostered through things like daily reflection threads, through platform, through groupthink, and more.
I think an unintentional process that we have is the fact that there are multiple opportunities to do one thing. So there's like multiple ways to get involved and engage with CU. There's multiple ways to get to know each other, whether it's through like a reflection thread or posting on the platform or like things you talk about in random. And so I think there's like the process of plugging in is that there are multiple processes. And I think that that's really beneficial because that way you can fit the needs or interests of a lot of different people.
Yeah, good point. I'm going to go ahead and send the doc here so that you all can look through it and we can start reflecting. And once you have something, just shout it out and I can write it down.
Wow, we got through a lot. I'll just say that these conversations always fly by, at least in how I experience these as like flying by, because I mean, this is technically a process, right? But it's really enjoyable because of the people that are engaged in the process, the design of the process. Like it's almost like the way that we've designed this is like it's meant to work with how humans are built, not like it's literally built for spontaneity. Ironic. I mean, we talked about spontaneity. This is literally built for spontaneity. You can literally pose any question you want related to this topic and respond to it in any way you want and reflect in any way you want.
I think that whole conversation about like the fact that spontaneity can be a process was kind of a big aha moment for me. Like I know I initially was pushing back, and then as you kept explaining it, Gary, I was like, oh, no, that kind of makes sense. Like you put yourself in positions where more spontaneous things happen to you, but that in and of itself is a process. And also like teaching yourself to lean into those things and not hold back. So I think that's been really interesting. Now I'm going to think about that more as I encounter quote unquote spontaneous things in my life.
I think you're pretty good at acting on spontaneous things. The commence thing, like, I was glad that you said yes. Hosting commence. I would say, even if you didn't realize it, you have a spirit of embracing the luck that's thrown your way.
I think the relationship between process and culture was something that I hadn't thought a lot about before, but it goes back to something that we talked about with Muhammad last week during group think about. He said you can't like replicate structures or like formats into different areas necessarily because like the dynamic and the culture is so different. And so I think it goes back to that as well. And it's interesting to think about how like you put the same process in different cultures and the way and like the different end products that you get, like because we had a group think with 2021 fellows and it was really different from the kinds of conversations that we have here. And so yeah, it's just interesting to think about that relationship as well.
I think this conversation has also shown, because we talked about so many different kinds of processes, that I was able to kind of like pull together a list of like what are good qualities in processes too. So for example, like processes with unforeseen benefits. So like in CU, how like there's one thing that we do, but it actually has like all these great benefits that don't necessarily correlate with that. Or like processes that multitask on your behalf, things that are like natural and organic. And then also things that can be like easily informed so that they can evolve, which kind of ties back to what Julia said about corporations and businesses that have a hard time doing that.
Before this, I hadn't really thought about the sort of disparate prevalence of processes in basically everything. I thought of processes as a more narrow thing.
This group thing is such a great process because like this reflection teaches you about what is surprising to other people, which teaches you about how people work, how the world works. I was mentioning to Chabu today that if there's anything that like we might make super popular, it's probably this. Like around the world, like once we I think we're already, this version of groupthink is really, really good. 14 iterations in. But yeah, I mean, it'll actually be good for all of you to start testing this out with your families and your friend groups, right? Like, and seeing what works and doesn't work and why, right? And I mean, that just goes back to like process and culture, right? Like some of you I know have tried some things that we do in CU with your families or friend groups, right? And they didn't land, right? And or extracurricular clubs, right? Didn't work the same. So why is that? It's really interesting.
And it also makes me wonder, like, can you, I mean, to what extent can you implement processes that permanently change the culture as well?
Something we didn't really talk about is, I've never heard this word used before, but I'm just kind of making it up. Process models. So like people that model, like show that a process makes sense. I mean, role model's fine as long as the role is tied to processes and not just like a title, right? Which often it is associated with.
This kind of connects to process models, but more so the idea of like processes and culture. The fact that to take a process and apply it in a different space, you also learn more about the culture that it originally existed in by doing that. And I'm someone who likes to create processes that can be applied in multiple contexts. So like the process that I have for school is similar to the process that I have for organizing myself for my commitments. And so I think that it's cool in the sense that like the application of a process in a different context, there's a lot of learning in that you can unpack that can help you improve those processes in a way too.
One thing that this conversation reminded me was that a lot of processes can be pretty oppressive. Just like stifling of human spirit.
Ashley or Julia, did you have any reflections you wanted to share?
I just thought it was interesting that we went to self-care processes first, because I think it just shows how important processes are day to day for people.
Yeah. I think the connection between like processes and spirit was really interesting. Like I guess I'm thinking about like I feel like certain processes have like certain spirits associated with them.
Democracy kind of right now has a bad vibe. How do we change that? Ooh. I really think that the people that will change civics and politics forever are going to be process models. It's not about what they like dogmatically believe about one issue or another. They're going to be modeling better ways of going about things.
And I think on that note, Gary, like with process modeling, if I'm understanding it correctly, that it's important. I think especially for people in like the old world to like see that something works on a smaller scale before trying it out. Like I think this whole like work cultures without titles was something that people were like, oh no, you can't work without titles. But then there've been these like wildly successful companies that are like, yeah, we don't have titles and look what we've been able to accomplish. And now that's something everyone's like, wow, we can actually like work as a team. We don't have to have like, you know, a layered leadership structure. So I guess wondering how can we model good democracy on a small scale in a way that people think it matters.
Yeah, like I think process models are super important for like the intangible things, like especially for like vulnerability. Like I think about like this past year, like I have had, you know, like so many amazing process models for that. You know, like just being able to like see Gary like brain drop semi privately, like even reading like Peter's like journal articles was really inspiring for me. So like I like definitely would not have like realized like authenticity and vulnerability were some of my key values, like had I not been exposed to like process models and then actually like putting myself into that process and like trying it out.
Like what you said makes so much sense, because I think this is something that came up in our last groupthink as well, but you can't ask people to do things that they have never witnessed before. And so if like the objective is a good democracy, or the objective is vulnerability or self-care, like that may be something that I want to do, but I don't know how to attain it. And so a process model, even if it's not the process you may end up using, or it's not the right process for you, any type of model is a good first step for engaging in something that you care about. And it meets you at like your level of understanding.
And I think like Chabu and Gary, there's so many examples of things that like people think it's stupid until somebody they trust does it and it seems like it's working. And like the example that comes to mind are like fad diets of like keto, go vegan, go vegetarian, where it's like you know, like these big name people start doing it, and then suddenly everybody's doing it. And it's like, you know, there's obviously so much more nuance to like, do certain diets work? Do diets work at all? But people do things when someone they trust can do it and show that it works in some capacity. So wondering how we can capitalize on that with something that's a little bit less tangible than like losing weight with a diet.
Trust, the relationship between trust and process is really profound.
I think that like a cool way to start that would be to almost like to pose a question, what's the process for like reinstating the good vibes? What's the process for like reimagining or reinvesting in the spirit of something? And I guess like I instantly think of like reflections because they help me reconnect with like vibes. I don't want to keep saying that word, but like they help me reconnect with good vibes. And so like you can almost use it as like a stepping stone. Like that process is a stepping stone for imagining what that could look like on a wider scale or to something that doesn't necessarily relate.
Any final thoughts?
What about from you, Madison?
I just really enjoyed the conversation, and it's helpful to think about for USP because Chabu and I were going to have our meeting before this, and she's like, is it okay if we move it to after? And I was like, I think that's actually better because we'll have the group think about process before. I think this is going to inspire some of our conversation for after this call.
If you want to just, you want to just quickly give a definite, well, it's kind of hard actually. We want to just quickly define what that is just for everyone else.
Yeah, so the USP kind of defines the way that
Unplugged school of process.
Yeah, unplugged school of process. It's like it defines the way that we approach things, like we solve problems in CU and eventually want to like tackle larger social issues. And so it's like a focus on processes opposed to just the end products. And so that's what inspired this conversation. And it's been really helpful to start thinking about some things as well. So yeah. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and I will see you again next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you guys. See ya.